Does confusion reign every time you try to read a sewing pattern? Do these innocent-looking pieces of tissue paper have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Fear no more. Subscribe now to the latest video series by Stitch to Victory on how to decode those mysterious marks once and for all. Let's roll up our sleeves. We can do this.
Hi Victory Stitches! Today's video we're going to be looking at how to decode and read sewing patterns. We are going to start with a discussion on different types of fabric, so let's head on down to my garage, which doubles as my cutting room. The two most common fabrics, in my opinion, without a grain is felt, which is used in a lot of soft toys, padding and various other things. So it's just a mishmash of fibre that has been felted together. This is actually what happens to a pure wool sweater when you wash it in the washing machine under really hot water. You know how it shrinks and gets all matted? That's basically a process called felting, and that's what they do to make this. So there's no grain, there's nothing that's going to unravel or fray. And the other common one, which people don't sort of think about as being a fabric, is leather. So leather is obviously an animal's skin. There's the soft side, there's the polished side. You can cut out any angle you like. You're not going to get it frayed, you're not going to worry about things twisting and turning because the whole thing is the same all over. People may not think of this as a fabric. This is a knitted sweater. Not hand knitted, granted, it is knitted on a machine, but it is like a smaller, finer version of what you would knit by hand. But what you are knitting when you're making a sweater is fabric. You don't normally cut it up after you've knitted it because if any of you are knitters, you'll know it'll unravel like mad. But what I want to give you the idea of is that if you look very closely, in fact, I'll turn it around this way. If you look very closely, you can see a lot of what look like V's, or little sort of chevron designs. Each one of those is a stitch, a knitted stitch. On one side you've got the V's, on the other side you've got the loops. And this is, in a sense, or in essence, this is the same type of fabric as you would get in a t-shirt. But when you look closely at a t-shirt, everything's a lot finer. So it gives you a lot of give this way, a certain amount of give this way as well. Perfect for items like t-shirts or snug fitting things that you can slide on without needing a zip because the material is very forgiving. The top I'm wearing today is a knit or jersey fabric, like the woolen sweater you saw, only much finer threads, and it's made of cotton, which a lot of knit fabrics are, like all your t-shirts. The grain, you'll often sort of see the word grain line on your sewing patterns, is where the V's are up and down. So the cross grain would be your side to side stretch, where if you actually pull the fabric you can sort of see little lines, and each of those lines is made up of all the V's. So this is the grain here running up and down in line with my body, and side to side is your cross grain. And the third fabric we're talking about today is a woven fabric. And just as it suggests, it's been woven on a loom, and it usually comes in a roll like this in the fabric store, or sometimes those flat pieces of cardboard where it's wrapped around, but the essence is the same. So what we've got is a roll of fabric. Let's unroll it a little bit so we can have a look at it. Now, from the way you're looking, you can see the top and the bottom. Those are what we call the selvage edges. So if you were weaving this fabric, your warp threads would be running parallel to your selvage edge. And if you were, and the weft fabric is running for you top to bottom, for me left to right. You can imagine somebody sitting at the loom, just throwing that shuttle through, and then they do all their things with their pedals and everything to move those warp fabrics, warp threads, and then they're shunting those shuttles through, and then they're changing them over back and forth. That is what happens when this sort of fabric is made, but the threads are very fine. So we're not going to get rugs here, we're going to get a nice dress fabric. So this is a cotton. So the grain line of a woven fabric runs parallel to the selvage. It is the warp thread. The weft thread, which goes perpendicular, so 90 degrees, is your cross grain. And if you go at a 45-degree angle, and it's really quite easy to see on this fabric because it's actually a woven check, if I actually line up my ruler here, on all those squares you get at 45 degree, that's called the bias. And the bias is very important because sometimes you're going to use its properties in designing and sewing certain types of garment. The bias has the most amazing stretch on it. See that? You get a lot of stretch out of that bias. It almost feels like a jersey fabric. You're going with the grain. There's really very little give. Very little at all. The cross grain, remember that's 90 degrees or perpendicular to the grain line, has a wee bit of give to it, not much, a little bit more than the grain line. But that bias, that's where you get all your stretch. So if you're cutting something that's on the bias, you do have to be careful when you're handling the fabric to not stretch it beyond recognition. So how do we use these properties of fabric when we're looking at a dressmaking pattern? Well, I've got Butterick 4803 here. It's a pattern for a skirt. It's a very simple pattern. I've picked the most basic one just for complete simplicity, especially for you people who are actually beginners and have never touched a pattern before, because this is going to be the simplest one to look at. So that's this one here. And the beauty of this one is the front and the back are actually the same piece. It's an elasticated waist. So I've just put a scrap of white paper down just so we can see the markings on the pattern piece, because otherwise it all blends into my green cutting mat and we won't be able to see a thing. As it is, sometimes the patterns, they print really faintly. Now the first thing we should take note on this pattern piece, we should actually look. We've got the brand and the serial number of the pattern, and we can see what sizes it covers. This pattern, before I cut it, was for sizes 8, 10, 12 and 14. So I cut it out as a size 14. I'm not sure why I didn't buy a 16, because normally I'm a 16 at the moment, but it is elasticated, so it's got a lot more forgiveness than a fitted garment. Now we can see the pattern has a number, the pattern piece has a number. This is the number 3. There are a bunch of other pieces that belong to different styles of the skirt there, so all we need to worry about for this skirt is piece number 3. It is the front and back of skirts A, B, D and E, and we are looking actually at D. Sorry, I lied before when I said E, it was D we're looking at. So we know we've got the right piece. It says to cut to on the fold. Now if we look over here, we can sort of see a bendy arrow pointing towards the edge of the piece, and it says centre fold. That bendy arrow means to place that line, the edge of the piece, on the fabric when it's folded. That way you will get a piece twice as big. So if I were to place that on my red fabric that I had before, which I'll just place up on the table. Okay, I've taken my fabric, unrolled it a ways, and I have folded my fabric in half with the grain line running with the fold, or the fold running with the grain line, so my selvage edges are meeting together. Most garments you make will be, the grain line will run the length of your body. So this is the waist of the skirt and this is mid-calf or whatever length it is. So the length of your body is running top to bottom with the grain line. Now remember we said that this piece had, and it's really hard to see because it's so faintly printed under, I'll put some white fabric under, we've got that centre fold. Here is our centre fold here, where that fabric has been folded in half. So I'm going to place this piece just along that centre fold so that it is flush with that. Then I would pin here and there just to make sure it's held correctly, or you can use pattern weights. And then I would actually cut around the edge of it so that I'm right up against the pattern without actually cutting into the pattern, but we know that that is the exact size we want. Now I'm back to the white paper because it really is hard to see the markings on this pattern against dark fabric. So I'm going to imagine that this white paper is actually my fabric and this is my fold. Imagine I've folded it so it's two thicknesses, you know, double thickness. So I've got that laid up right up against that fold. Now there's a whole bunch of other squiggles on here that are just potentially very confusing. All these dotted lines and there's dots and dashes and big dashes represent the different sizes for the pattern, because when you buy a pattern it's not just one size, it's a multi-size pattern. So I've already cut it out into a size 14, so I can quite happily ignore the 8, the 10 and the 12 sizing because there's no way I'm ever going to fit those. So I'm just concerned that I've cut out the size 14 perimeter, the double triangles here, those are called notches, and when you cut out your fabric you can either cut so that you go with your scissors, you can go down here and actually come out and cut so that's a sticking out notch in your fabric, or if you're a bit lazy like me, you just cut straight across here, and before you unpin your fabric you put a little snip through here and here. All that does is it enables you, because you have to cut 2 pieces of this, so when you fold them out you've got a left and a right and a front and a back, so that when you put the 2 pieces right sides together, front and back, you can match those notches and you know that you've got them lined up correctly. At the top we've got a line and a mark, it says waistline. So that is actually where the garment will be sitting on your waist. This here is the fold line. So when you've cut out your fabric you would actually mark with some chalk how far down that is, and you would fold your fabric over, make a casing to put your elastic through or your ribbon or whatever it is that's going to cinch around your waist, so that the waistline will become the top of the skirt. And further on we have got a double line, 2 lines very, very close together. That's your lengthen or shorten lines. So if you're a bit short or rather tall compared with the average that they do patterns for, you would slice through that line, through the double line, and expand for extra height, or just bring them closer together and overlap them if you need it to make the skirt shorter. You don't do it at the hem. You don't add to the length down here to make it longer, and you don't put a massive great big hem on or cut off here to make it shorter. This is the point where you shorten from. And they've actually got a thing here, a fold line for petite. So if you're particularly delicate and little, you would actually just take the pattern and fold there for petites. Something I've never had to do. And that is the basics of this skirt pattern. I thought I'd start with something really nice and simple. And as we progress we will look at blouses, sleeves, trousers and all the funny shapes that they are, because remember what we're doing is we're actually looking at a 2-dimensional recipe for something that's going to be 3-dimensional. So sometimes you'll end up with some weird and wonderful pattern shapes, but as you start to construct your garment it'll make sense how it all falls into place. But for now, that is your introduction to looking at a pattern piece. Hey Victory Stitches, if you like this video please give us the thumbs up, and I just want to say this one was actually in response to a few people who had been tearing their hair out in frustration trying to decode sewing patterns. So we are going to progress to more complicated bits. We started with something nice and easy just to get your feet wet. So like I said, like, subscribe, comments below if you have any questions as well, because I love the feedback and it helps me plan future videos, and click the notification bell also, and you will get notified in your inbox when the next video is up and ready to go. And I will see you next time. Bye!